Hello and welcome to Behave, the podcast with your host, Dr. Tamsin Astor, Chief Habit Scientist, international speaker, and author of the book Force of Habit. Today, I am super excited to be chatting with Gordon. And Gordon, I met in the NSA, the National Speakers Association, but in case you're thinking the other NSA, when he moved from Canada to Cleveland, Ohio. And I was like, we need to connect and be friends because I live in Cleveland, Ohio too. Welcome, Gordon.
Great to be here. Lovely to see you again, Tamsin.
So great, so great. So tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Gordon Stein. I wrote a book called Cashflow Cookbook. And the idea was I was kind of tapering down my career and retiring, and then wrote Cashflow Cookbook. And then it's been podcasts and speaking and all sorts of things, but really exciting about helping people with their personal finances. There's a ton of information out there. It's confusing. It's hard to follow. I think there's simple steps, and let's get everyone a millionaire.
Totally, totally. And I read your book, and I actually, if you want more chat on this, Gordon and I had a chat about this on my Facebook page last week in April. So actually, that'll be a couple of weeks ago. That'll be in April. And it's just very simple ways to make concrete changes in your life. And I think what's very similar about the way you and I approach all of this is you have to be willing to face the data, right? And I think a lot of people, particularly when it comes to money, and I see that with my clients, are like, la 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 la. I don't want to look at my credit card statements. I don't want to look at my debt. I don't want to think about how much I'm going to have to put aside for my kids to get to college, right? And they get stuck. So when you think about behavior, like how do you help people go, if you face your money and all of that, life will actually be better? How do you help walk them through that process?
I think you nailed it with the numbers and the facing reality part. And I absolutely think that's the place to start. When you look at a lot of different personal finance programs and authors, they start with this whole notion of budgeting. I've not found joy in budgeting. I don't know who finds joy in budgeting. Right. You can find fights in budgeting. You can find pain in budgeting, but not joy. So I think the place to start is to look at wealth and what you own minus what you owe on it. And the bigger that number is, you have options then. You can borrow against assets. You can create new streams of cash flow. You can take a look at what's happening. Where's the money going? You can improve it and you start to accelerate that wealth. And then you get to a point of joy. The bills pay for themselves. There's no stress. There's no worry. The thread I'm hearing here, which I really like, is like ease and like you're not having to sacrifice and it's like without effort, right? Which I think a lot of people think when they're changing their habits, when they're looking at their finances, that it's got to be this like white knuckling, like I've got to deprive myself of all my favorite foods. I've got to stop, buying the $20 bottle of wine and get the $9 bottle of wine or whatever it is, right? We get kind of stuck in that. It's going to be about deprivation, right? Yeah, and I think, the whole notion behind Cashflow Cookbook is this idea of a lot of personal finance books talking about, hey, you got to start by saving 10%. And most people say, I don't have the 10%. My fridge just broke, the roof just caved in, the dishwasher, the kids' hockey gear, whatever it is. And so the whole premise is there's simple things that we can tweak, easy changes. You don't change your lifestyle, minimal effort, minimal sacrifice. You tweak those and you apply it to building wealth. It's just as simple as that. And the longer you do it, the richer you get.
Love it. Okay, so the next question I have for you, because the statistic that blew my mind when I read your book was the number of marriages that end due to like stress about finances. And, and I think that's a real reality for many people. And it's an interesting thing that I find as a coach, because the majority of my clients are women. And often when it comes to the moment of objections, it's, I need to talk to my husband or my partner about putting this kind of money into my business, into my self-development, right? And it's really interesting to me the way that the women often go into this with like asking for permission rather than asking for support, right? Around spending money on themselves and their growth and their business. So, do you have a suggestion for how people in relationships can handle this, given that it's such a sort of an area of like explosive toxicity and stress?
It's a big one for sure. I think like anything else, it's communication and, figure out what are those shared goals. And I think
I like this notion of playing the movie of what is our life going to look like with this set of changes in it. And
Mhm.
it's one that you have to really get closely aligned on. So I think it's no more complex than really talking about it and understanding where both parties are starting to go. I
Mm.
think the flip side, what happens is, in many cases, if people are divorced, it was one person who was the principal, carrier of the purse. And so then the other person, upon divorce, doesn't know how to manage their money, how to get started, how to generate wealth, how to get out of debt. So I think it's
Right.
important for everyone to get up to speed on this.
Yes, it's interesting. I've spoken to a few people over the years who've talked about coaches and consultants who've talked a lot about how they feel that, a big problem with our society is that we don't talk enough about money in a healthy way, right?
Yep, yep.
And that we don't educate our children around money, whether it's as parents or in school, right? We are like, you need to know your algebraic equations and, y equals mx plus c, but like you don't need to understand what having a credit card is. What is a stock? What does it mean to put money into a mutual fund? What is Bitcoin? Like, how do we think about this? And how do we, have conversations? And it was really interesting because I grew up in a family where talking about money was just not the done thing, right?
Mhm.
It wasn't that it was bad or wrong. It was not part of polite conversation,
Mhm.
right? And because
Yes.
I grew up in a family where our financial needs were met, there was never the stress around it, right? It was just like, one doesn't talk about that. It's not polite conversation. So what was interesting when I started working for myself and I got divorced is I decided to make a radical 180 there and start having conversations with my kids and say, if I budget $300 a month for our entertainment, if we spend $100 of that going to a nice restaurant, then maybe we can't go to a movie theater next week or next month, and we'll have to like get a movie from Netflix and get candy from Target, right? So like, let's think as a family about what we can do there. And I started started actually having these conversations with my kids because I wanted them to see, like, where do you make these choices and what does it mean? And not that one is right or wrong, but like they have consequences, these choices, right? Do you have a sense of how, as a society, we should broach this?
Well, I think you're hitting on a key point, and I think it's true. The basic pattern I see of what we learn in schools is the things you least need in your life are the things that we learn in school. All the things that you need that cause problems in life, which might be money, relationships, how to succeed in
Communication,
your career,
right?
communication, how to manage your weight, how to stay fit.
Delegation, yeah.
It's
Negotiation.
whatever is important. A spouse selection, whatever's important doesn't get covered in school. So, and money is right in the thick of that.
Yeah.
Not just the incidence of divorce, but I was reading a piece on a new notion of presenteeism, this idea of people who are on the job physically, but they're not actually there because their mind is worried about their debts and their finances and their all these kinds of issues. So we've really got to get people tuned up on their personal finances, no question.
Mm. Yeah, no, it's a big thing. And I think, one of the things that I really noticed when I moved from London to the US was the US to me felt incredibly different in terms of the sort of consumer, just shop, shop, shop energy,
Mhm.
right? So for example, I grew up, getting my shoes rehealed, right? Like and my dad's had like leather loafers for like 30, 40 years, that he
Exactly.
would
Yep.
buff and would go and get them rehealed and restitched or whatever, right? And I love Birkenstocks. I'm like a mad ass hippie, right? And I remember when the heel started to go,
Ah,
and I remember saying to somebody like, where do I get my Birkenstocks rehealed? Because I've worn the arch in perfectly to my feet. And they were like, just go and buy a new one at the mall. And I was like, you're not hearing me. Like, I like these ones. I just want to get them rehealed, And people would go, oh, we're just going to the mall at the weekend. And I said, oh, what are you after? Like, are you getting new shoes or a birthday present for your mom? No, we just go shopping on the weekend. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, what are you talking about? And there was this sort of energy of consumerism, like it's a hobby here, and just keep going and shopping and buying and consuming, which was a real shock to me. And I don't know whether it's because I grew up with parents who'd lived through the war, right?
yes.
And they grew up with that energy of like preserving, and I don't know, it's really interesting to me.
Well, I think, a couple of things, having worked in sales and marketing for an embarrassing 35 years. And, the tools in that world get more and more sophisticated. You've got companies examining MRI signaling in brains to figure out what word choices will drive them to buy. You've got, micro locations within stores. You've got store sensors. You've got, dynamically changing copy on the signs depending on how people are shopping. But the consumers had no incremental defense tools. So, it's a losing battle. An interesting way of looking at it, if you ever watched Marie Kondo, the organizer on TV and Netflix, and, a lot of
joy.
it's all about, is your sweater making you happy?
Yeah.
But what I find interesting is when you look at the sort of output of the show, the bags of garbage, like she hauls all of this stuff out of people's houses, and the houses look fabulous afterwards, all the sweaters lined up like little soldiers, all that type of thing. But what I'm fascinated with is all of this stuff heading out the door. You've got $50 an item, maybe 20 items per bag. So it's $1,000 a bag heading out. Somebody bought this stuff. And in most cases, it never got used, it never got worn. And if that money was, and again, it's not like you gave anything up because you never used it in the first place, but you paid for it. So you get those dollars working to pay down credit cards, pay down car loans, pay down mortgages, and start investing. And then that money starts to accelerate and starts working for you. And that's what it's about.
Right. And you said that, what was that crazy statistic of the amount of the percentage that you use of your closet? There's a crazy.
We only ever wear 25% of the clothes we buy.
Right.
But it's true of lots of other things too. So again, it's not about Cashflow Cookbook, not about, giving things up. It's not about sacrificing. It's about getting a little smarter, and it's about grinding down expenses where you're not actually giving up anything.
Right. No, and it's really interesting that I worked with a stylist when I started getting more into the professional speaking. So
I was going to comment on that.
Yeah. And it was really interesting because, it was a sort of 3-stage process. Process 1 was like to go through my wardrobe and see what I had, right? And also to sort of evaluate my style. And then it was go shopping. And then it was put outfits together, right? So that when I travel for a speaking event, I can just throw a whole lot of things in and I've got coordinated outfits. But what was really funny is she said to me, she's like, I don't think I've ever been into somebody's closet who's got clothes that are more than 25 years old. And I have clothes from high school. I'm 44. I'm going to be 45 in June. I have clothes in my closet from high school that I still wear. And she was like, this is insane. But what was really fascinating to me was this sort of concept of thinking about your closet in a much more modular way, right? Because I was like, I've got mom clothes, I've got yoga teacher clothes, and then I've got like wedding and funeral clothes. And I've got, and I don't have any of those kind of like funky, and I was like, look, I'm never going to be a black pantsuit kind of lady, like you're going to have to, and she got me like orange suede jackets, and she totally nailed my look. But it was really interesting, this idea of like being very intentional about your wardrobe, right? And so now when I shop, I'm super intentional. I know what colors work for my skin tone, and I go in and I'm like, oh, that's the wrong color, not doing that, or I know that this shape fits me. So like, that's super cute, but that doesn't fit my body shape, right? And it was really helpful having that rubric, because I'd be like, cute, but no, and it helped me be much more contained about that. And in terms of like applying that to other things, I think, when we start to understand what works for us and what we actually need, we can make much more informed choices, right? Which is a large part of what you're getting at, right?
Well, go back to the clothing one. So on average, as Americans, we spend 7% of our income on clothing. So if you made $100,000 a year, you're spending on average $7,000.
I didn't spend that much money on clothes.
Well, people do. Let's round it up to 8 to make the math easy. So of the 8,000, you're going to buy $2,000 that you're going to wear, and the rest is going to get binned eventually, right? So now you could actually double that to $4,000 of good stuff, but not, remove the non-mindful clothes. So now you have twice as many fabulous clothes that you love, but you chopped your annual clothing spending in half. No effort, no sacrifice. But now you got $4,000 a year towards paying down debt or increasing investment. Boom.
I love that. Okay, so let's talk about
Now you've identified that, and if you guys get the book, it's brilliant because it's a book. I'm a big fan of books that you don't have to sit down and read cover to cover because we're all fully overwhelmed. So you can get in there, figure out the logic, and then pick the chapters that make sense for you in terms of like the recipes that appeal to you. So the thing that I think is really interesting and was interesting to me watching the comments after we did that live last week was who said what. And what was really interesting is how a lot of people were like, oh, this is where I can save money and I'm doing it. And I'm like, I've got rid of this and I've got rid of that and I've changed that. And you were like, well, and now you need to invest it. Right? You know, like 2 or 3 people commented about how they were making changes and it was going to save them, you know, hundreds of dollars a year. But then you said, well, you have to then take the next step rather than go, well, now I've got $600 extra a year that I can spend on whatever. Right? So when you figure that out, I would sit there and go, okay, so now I've, you know, maybe, you know, go, if I do a couple of the cash flow recipes and say, maybe I realized like 2 or 3 grand a year that I've liberated.
Easy.
Is that smarter for me to go, I'm going to pay off my car loan, I'm going to pay off my student debt, I'm going to pay off my, or is it smarter to go, I'm going to put that money in a CD or give it to my financial advisor? Like what, when you do that, what do you think is the smartest choice to then do with that liberated money?
The most important thing is to do something virtuous with it rather than just letting it flit away on its own. So I think,
right?
I think it depends, you know, it depends a lot on your situation, obviously. So, I mean, real quick, you got to look at when you do your wealth statement, which is everything that you own minus everything that you owe. It's a free template on Cashflow Cookbook and Utensils. Download it, it's free. I won't spam you. I won't sell your data to the Russians or anything. So when you do that, you're going to have all of your debts there, and then take a look at what's the interest rate. So if you have a bunch of credit card debt at 20%, that's a 5-alarm blaze. You've got to get rid of that. Never mind investing in a CD at 1.25% if you're lucky. You've got to get rid of that. Get rid of that debt. Now, if the only debt that you have is, let's say, a mortgage and it's at 2 or 3%, historically in the markets you're going to earn 7 or 8% in the U.S. stock market in general. So, and that would be a case where you probably want to leave the mortgage where it is and pay and start to get that investment building.
So it's a know your situation, right? And then the other question I have, which is always really interesting to me. So when you read these books or you watch these videos of people who help you sort out your finances, a lot of people suggest that you start with the smallest debt first. So say you've got $500 here and you've got 2,000 grand here, 2 grand here, and then you've got like, 18 grand or 40 grand or whatever here. They say like pay off the smallest one first. Do you agree with that as a sensible way to manage the debt you owe?
Depends on you. So I would say psychologically,
to every question.
Psychologically, easiest is to pay off that smallest one. And if it was $120 a month, now you've got $120 more a month to, roll into that next biggest one and so on. Mathematically, the best way to do it would be going after the highest interest rate one first.
Okay.
So if you've got the self-discipline, I would go after the highest interest rate one first. That's the one that's going to increase your wealth the quickest. But psychologically, a lot of people want to, knock off that one debt, get rid of it, and then start going after the second one. Most important thing, and I think, is to get that statement of wealth going, because then it'll change, it'll rewire your brain. It's the thing to look at.
Yeah.
Like when you use the eating analogy, when I get a little something creeping over my waistband, I start saying no to desserts. Right? So you gotta have this little feedback loop.
Totally. No, and I say that to people because a lot of my friends who are in the body wellness, female empowerment space, they throw away your scales. And I'm 5'10" and I put on weight all over me. So I can easily put on 10, 15 pounds and not have to change my clothing, right? Because it's gone on all over me. So I know that I have to stand on the scales every couple of weeks just to keep track of that. And it's really interesting because a lot of people are like, chuck out the scales, they make you feel shitty about yourself. And I know, because I'm not one of those people that just puts it on, say, around the midsection, right? And so I know I have to keep a vague eye on that. Otherwise it can suddenly be 15 pounds. And I'm like, well, shit, like it's not a couple of pounds, it's 15 pounds, right? So again, what you're saying, which is really interesting, is you have to have the big picture, be willing to gather that data, and then on a regular basis look at what's what's coming in and going out, and what, where the biggest percentage debt, where it makes most sense to do the work, right?
And I think the key is go after the boring stuff.
Yeah.
Keep your latte, but you know what? Call your cell phone company and have a chat with them. You take
Yeah.
your cell phone bill to summer camp, and you have a chat. And I'll guarantee you, if you got to sit on hold and all that. But I'll guarantee you, at the end of it, you're going to knock off $100 a month, or maybe $200 or $300 a month if you've got
Yeah.
phones and TV and internet and a cottage and all
Yeah.
the rest of it.
Yeah.
And you're not missing anything. You got all the same cell phone service you always had. You're just on a better price plan. There's a whole family of those $13,000 a month worth in Cashflow Cookbook.
Yeah.
That's the place to start.
So, what would you like to change in the way people manage their finances? Like, as a sort of overarching, like, what's the thing?
I think the big thing is knowing this power of compounding. Einstein said, he talked about it as being the eighth wonder of the world. And he said those who, pay it are disadvantaged. Those who enjoy it have this fantastic advantage. So you got to get on the right side of that. So I think it's really about knowing that, at 25, if you can save $1, that dollar is going to be worth $16 by the time you're 65. That's a huge deal. So start prying out some of that money and putting it away for that future self, because it's not $1 here getting your $1 there. It's $1 now getting $16 later on.
Right.
So carving out some of that money, increase that savings rate. What percent of what you earn are you setting aside?
Yeah, no, that's so true. I like, one of the books that was really influential for me to start taking charge of this was Profit First, after I saw Mike Michalowicz speak here in Cleveland. And it was really interesting for me to sort of reframe this idea, particularly, as an entrepreneur who had only ever worked in businesses. I'd always worked in places where money was put into my account once a month, right? And it didn't vary dependent on my performance, right? I'd always done jobs that were apart from a few sort of waiting table jobs in college, but the majority of my adult life, I'd done work where it was really to do with, like, I showed up and did the work and the money appeared, right? And it was really interesting to me to think about the very different way of thinking about where I was willing to spend money in my business and what it meant in terms of where I was, taking the profit, and how much was I willing to face that and do that work around it. And I think, it's really important that we keep this conversation going out there, because it's a little bit like a lot of the conversations that I feel like have risen up in the US in the last couple of years, like the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of these things that people are like, that have for so many years been like, that's not polite conversation, we're going to keep it hidden. And the way we deal with our money is so important, right? It's so important because it feeds into like our value structure, right? I think as well, like on that bigger, broader stage, where we are willing to spend our money says a lot about who we are as humans, right?
Well, it changes everything, because once you get control of it, you get to this place of financial freedom. If it's a gorgeous day, I'm on my bike. If it's raining, I'm playing my guitar.
Right.
I don't have to prepare for the quarterly review. All those things are behind me. And if I want to speak and I want to help people, then I book the time and do it. But to get to that kind of freedom is fabulous. And that's a gift that I think everyone can have by just dialing in, being a little bit more mindful on these things.
Love it. Love it. Okay. So I'm going to ask you the 3 questions that I ask all of my guests. The first one you didn't know about, because I like to give people I like this to be fresh and raw. So what is one behavior that you've done work on, you've been coached on, had support on, had therapy on, but you still struggle with on a regular basis?
What behavior I still struggle with on a regular basis? You know what, I think I'm going to say mastery. If you think about, doing well in your fitness and you're watching your eating, but the trick is keeping all of those at a consistent high level. I think that's the real challenge. That's a hard one. And where I've got, instrumentation, my Apple Watch with my rings, I've got some things, but try and keep that all going while you're being a great husband and a great dad and all of these other things.
Right.
That's the key.
You're right. There's that sense often. And I mean, it's interesting. Like I talk to my clients about that. They're sort of like the work-life balance, right? Which is I feel is such a myth, right? But I also say to people that, imbalance is important because that's where growth happens, right? Like even walking, right? Every step you take, you're falling. So there's inherent imbalance there, right? And so if there's more focus on family, more focus on kids, more focus on your partner, more focus on your business, like those ebb and flow, and that keeps us going. But I love this idea of how do you create systems? It's almost like you create doable levels to aim for, right? So rather than saying I'm going to work out for 90 minutes or 2 hours every day, it's like I can commit daily to 30 minutes. And that's my personal commitment to be moving, not just walking, but like committed 30 minutes every day. And I'm like, busy mom, run my own business, 3 kids. I can do 30 minutes a day. Right. But if I put that to an hour, I'd probably fail 2 or 3 times a week. And then I'd end up feeling shitty about myself. Right. So that feels like a doable. So that's interesting. It's like sort of it's examining these different pieces and like, where can I commit and keep evolving? Love it. Love it. All right. Second question. What is your favorite quotation and why?
My all-time favorite, I read it in a book called Born to Win by Louis Timberlake. It's a bunch of books of that title. He quoted Henry Ford, who said, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
I love that.
When I first read it, I mean, it's a nifty little turn of phrase, but, as the years have progressed, the power of that is really remarkable. And I've proved it to myself in all kinds of possible endeavors. A person unencumbered by any musical skills, playing the guitar, love it. So anybody can do anything. It's the total truth.
It's like mindset 101. I always use that quotation when I'm speaking and talking and coaching on mindset, because I'm like, it's in your control. Totally. You just have to be willing to recognize that and like take the radical responsibility for it, which a lot of people are like, yay, it's in my control. And then other people are like, fuck, it's in my control. Like I can't.
There's nowhere else to look.
I can't blame it on anyone else. Right?
Right on. It's right there.
Yeah. Okay. So the third question I love to ask all of my guests is, if you had a theme song that played when you walked into a room and everybody would be like, oh, it's Gordon Stein, what would it be?
You know what? I had to go with Born to Run because I'm a big Springsteen fan. I love the song. I had it on my shirt when I ran the New York City Marathon. Tramps like us, baby, we were born to run. And it's just full of energy. It's full of possibility. And people often say I'm stuck in the 80s. I don't know why I'd ever want to leave. So I haven't. So that's my song.
I love it. Awesome sauce. Thank you so much. Okay, so where can people find you? Where do you hang out the most, Gordon?
Everywhere, all the social media things on Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. You can find cashflowcookbook.com is where I blog. And so they're all free. There's about 50 blog posts up there now. And you can get Cashflow Cookbook there or on Amazon.
I love it. And what freebie are you offering our guests today?
Well, I thought what we do is do 3 Zoom calls where people can get together. If you can post up a time and a date, let's do a Zoom. Let's get your listeners on, bring your financial challenges, problems, and I'd love to help them. So let's set the dates together. We'll get it posted on your site, and I'll post it on mine, and let's get people to jump in.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with me today, Gordon, on this snowy spring day here in Cleveland.
Terrific.
I really appreciate all of your insight and time and effort. And watch this space, guys. Gordon and I are creating fun ideas to keep this conversation going for you all.
Really fun. Thanks so much, Tamsin.